also from my side. My name is Julia Winkler, and I'm very happy to be moderating this panel tonight that follows now after the film on European migration deals as crimes against humanity. I'm myself here tonight on behalf of Criminalize, which is an association fighting against the systematic criminalization of people on the move under smuggling charges for steering the boat or taking on another task on board during their journeys, and who often, just after having survived detention in Libya's prison system, are being faced again with imprisonment upon arrival in Europe and with long prison terms. Now we want to build on what we've just seen in the film and discuss further and in more detail how European migration policies, and in particular the Libya-Italy memorandum, enable and also entrench the crimes committed against people on the move in Libya and the Mediterranean, and what needs to be done and what is already being done to stop these deals and these crimes. And what is also important to mention is that this event takes place at a very critical moment, as it's just a few months until the Italy-Libya memorandum is set for automatic renewal. It was already mentioned, I think, that it was signed in February 2017, and it renews automatically every 3 years unless one of the parties gives notice of withdrawal at least 3 months before the renewal. And given that the new renewal will take place in February 2026, early November, which is just in 1 month, is basically the last opportunity to prevent its continuation. And for the discussion now, as already mentioned, I'm joined by 3 excellent experts on this whole topic. There is David Yambio, Phoebe Walton, and Allison West. I'm going to start with the way they're sitting. David is a community advocate, human rights defender, and spokesperson for refugees in Libya. Refugees in Libya was co-founded by David in 2021 and is a movement that seeks to amplify the voices of people on the move who are trapped in Libya and to push for accountability and policy change. Having survived detention in Libyan prisons himself, David now works to expose the human rights violations linked to EU migration and externalization policies. Next to him is Phoebe. Phoebe is a researcher at Forensis, which is a non-governmental, not-for-profit association working for and in collaboration with individuals and communities affected by state and corporate violence to support their demands for justice, reparations, and accountability. And with a background in architecture, Phoebe conducts visual and spatial investigations, producing evidence for presentation in legal, political, and cultural forums. And she led the investigation escaping Libya's detention industry that we just saw. And last but not least is Allison. Allison is a senior legal advisor at the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, where she leads the organization's work on legal accountability for international crimes against migrants and refugees in Libya and the Central Mediterranean. She helps develop legal strategies to hold both Libyan and European actors accountable for these crimes. And her work is grounded in close collaboration with individual survivors and survivor-led groups like refugees in Libya, using law as a tool to support their struggles for justice and to expose the violence of Europe's border regime. And I'd like to start straight away with Phoebe, who, as I just mentioned, led the investigation we just watched. And first of all, thank you and your team and also the 3 protagonists for this really impressive work. And I'd like to ask you if you could tell us what prompted you and your team to do this film and why now? Maybe also to correct, it was just released this year, not in 2005. And yeah, maybe you can explain to us why it is necessary and why now, and also how it can help us to understand European migration policies better and also to respond to them.
This one works. Hello? Okay. Yeah, thank you for the introduction and the invitation here today. So we started this investigation. We were invited by Lawyers for Justice in Libya. They're our partners on this project. And they invited us because they wanted to make visible and to make visual evidence about what's happening in detention. There's been kind of a number of reports now by the UN and by other organizations that are reporting on what's actually happening in detention, and yet there still isn't any sort of change or any sort of legal accountability. And I think this is in part, at least, because there isn't a kind of visual understanding of what's taking place in detention. And this is the logic of border externalization. So Europe, through offsetting its borders, through paying other countries, essentially, to do their border management, through paying countries like Libya, can avoid any sort of responsibility. So no one is actually understanding what's taking place in these sites, which should be understood as European borders. This is purposely so. They're purposely not wanting us to see the kind of grave human rights violations taking place, the crimes against humanity that's taking place. So the first step towards accountability is actually to be seeing what's happening in them. And so that's where we came in, to make a visual understanding of what's actually happening. And I think it's worth also saying that increasingly there's a kind of understanding of what's happening at sea. So more and more people are aware of pushbacks and pullbacks. People have seen small boats crossings, but still not much is known about what's actually happening when they're returned, when they're taken into detention. And why now? I think it's kind of clear why now, with more European countries also trying to increase externalization practices, with the Memorandum of Understanding being up for renewal and not much being said or done about it. It's kind of clear there needs to be a wider public understanding and advocacy to then be able to push for also legal accountability.
Thank you. Following up on that, you mentioned the important fact of European externalization policies being deliberately hidden and being deliberately abstract and hard to see and hard to understand. Maybe could you elaborate a bit more then on the methods and tools you used in order to actually then uncover them and make them visible and make them easier to understand, how you did in your film?
Yeah, exactly. So our methods came out of the logics of externalization, really. So we weren't allowed to go and look at these sites that are European borders. We couldn't go to Libya, we couldn't access these spaces, even though there are state-sponsored detention centres with EU funding. People can't visit them, right? So we had to try and bridge that gap. We had to try and make evidence from afar, and so we used a combination of open source techniques and our kind of digital modelling, which we're used to, but we were focusing on the voices of local experts and the expertise of them for really understanding these specific sites, how they came about and what's taking place in them, as well as the experience of survivors. And so in this, then, a survivor that was in detention actually becomes the expert on detention in this way, because they're the ones that have seen what's taking place, and they're the ones that have experienced firsthand, the grave human rights violations. And so it was very important for us to centre the voices of the survivors, and we use a technique that we've developed now for a number of years called situated testimony, in which we use 3D digital modelling as a way of reconstructing the memory of a witness, turning their memories into kind of visual evidence. And this also kind of gives a huge amount of agency to a survivor. Suddenly their testimony actually becomes a key, crucial piece of evidence for hopefully enacting some sort of change.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really strong and also important how this very bureaucratic, abstract language of these deals then also becomes visible, how it has impact on actual human beings. Yeah, thank you. Maybe now to you, David. We've already mentioned the Italy-Libya memorandum already a few times, and also Phoebe touched upon some of the direct consequences of it. I'd like to ask you if you could break down for us the main aspects of the deal, of the memorandum of understanding, and explain to us in what way the content enables these crimes, making Italy complicit in them.
Thank you. I think I would really. Does it work? Okay, now? Okay, I have to bring it more closer. No. Okay, this is much better. Yeah, I really wanted to acknowledge the huge effort that has been put into this, specifically on what you concluded with, which is focusing on the situated testimony, which try to reconstruct the memories of those who could not film their situation. I think this is very powerful for me as a person who has lived on those experiences. The other comrade, when he was describing the escape from prison, breaking the iron, that experience is not only his. It's an experience of many thousands of people whose liberty depends on what their physical and ingenuousness can do within such situation, which you may see in Hollywood, called the prison break. When I had experienced it and then I arrived in Europe, I watched Prison Break. I was like, well, I lived it myself. And if I had to act it, it will be 10 times stronger than what has been shown in that artificial moment. On coming to the MOU, of course, I do not really think that I could be the right person to detail the content of this memorandum, because I have seen it in different formats. I have experienced it in different formats on my body, and I have witnessed the consequence of it. And as a person who was subject to the immediate suffering of this MOU, I have always seen it with one window, which is a mechanism created within a framework of xenophobic, racist, and exploitative procedure. Why I'm saying this? First, to look at the circumstance of Libya. Libya, if we say it's a failed state, that will be maybe too much to say, but it's also a product of Europe. The consequence of the chaos in Libya today comes from the fact that Europe and the NATO members, once they were taking down Gaddafi, there were no proper mechanism put in place to say, okay, these people, they're coming from a bloody revolution, this is how they will overcome it. So Europe has utilized that chaos in order to continue to enslave, in order to continue to extort and to exploit resources, which is part of Libya's territory, because it's a country full of rich resources. But coming to the original framework that is open to the public, it is basically the border management, the management of people on the move, who is to be allowed to come, who is to be allowed to stay in that particular country. When he was describing the people who could access the detention facility, he mentioned UNHCR. I have seen them. He mentioned IOM. In this detention facility, UNHCR has also become part of this containment mechanism that goes into those detention facility, because as an investigative entity, you cannot easily go there. But UNHCR can go there, they witness, they know what is truly happening. They may bring blanket, they may bring a packet of biscuit, but never truly questioning that armed guard who continue to lock you up there. So within this, we have seen that within this framework, it enables the provision of fast boats, the patrol boats that the Libyan militias are using to intercept. What is making it more worse is that these different entities who call themselves the Libyan Coast Guard, they are not an entity that could be held accountable. They don't have a database of how many people, if 27,000 have been intercepted at gunpoint this year alone. Where are these people? If they were brought to a detention facility, who are they? Which kind of nationality? Where did they disappear to? So no literally data exists in the first place, which makes it extremely difficult to be for these entities to be held accountable. And this way, Europe escapes the responsibility because they know they are dealing with a shadowy network to control and to reinforce their interest. On another hand, it's also something that I already mentioned, that it's a way of control to always keep Libya in chaos. The militias like Al-Dawi, they're fighting the ones in Tripoli because they want to have a legitimate recognition from the European end. We have seen the ones who has already been assassinated. We're talking about Abdurrahman Milad al-Bija, we are talking about al-Kikili from the stability support apparatus, who were having golden tickets to travel to Rome to meet with the politicians and then to discuss. In between, the smuggled fuel, which is already well articulated in the documentary itself. So here right now, what we have seen and we have experienced is a mechanism that is enabling crimes against humanity. It was already said, not because I lived it, but also independent fact-finding mission like the UN, they themselves had declared in 2023, and they continue to do so, saying that there is reasonable ground. This is their word, reasonable. But for us, we know who have been committing these crimes that amounts to crimes against humanity, not only on the Libyan people, but on refugees and migrants. So the second part of the question, I think it's all gone. What was it?
Yeah, I mean, you answered most of it already. It was like how it also like then shows Italy's complicity specifically. Maybe if you have some more thoughts on that. I think you already described
what I know is that the complicity is not only Italy's, because the mechanism and the funds that has been funneled to this mechanism comes from different countries, including Germany. Germany was training and financing the so-called Libyan Coast Guard, and the money they put it in a very shadowy network which goes through the EU Trust Fund for Africa, and then it disappears. It all goes in millions to Libya, and then Italy is just the one-man bodyguard that Europe is using to commit its crimes, that Europe is using in many ways to reinforce the colonial infrastructure that was already in place. And for racism, I cannot speak because it's visible in every street that you go across Europe, in Berlin, in Rome, in Brussels. As far as you go to Geneva, you see that there is racist infrastructure put in place. Even here in Berlin, when you go to Brandenburg, there are the removal centers, there are the detention centers that are kept intentionally to isolate people, those who manage to break these boundaries, these several shields that has been put in place to hinder people from reaching the European territory.
Thank you very much. Maybe adding now from the international law perspective, maybe Allison, you could explain to us from this perspective, how you look at and analyze the crimes that are taking place in Libya and in the Mediterranean.
Thank you very much, and thank you to you both, especially to Forensis and of Jail for making the film. I think it's so rare and important that we can visualize also the legal concepts that I will now talk a bit more about. So a lot of the things that we saw in the film, arbitrary detention, forced labor or enslavement, torture, sexual and gender-based violence, these are not isolated. I think the film does a really good job showing of how these are part of a system of violence or an industry, and that needs to be looked at as such. This industry is targeting, in this instance, people on the move, both in Libya and at sea. And under international criminal law, we can characterize these, qualify them as crimes against humanity. So crimes against humanity are serious acts that are committed in the context of a widespread or a systematic attack against a civilian population. I think that this legal framing is really important for a few different reasons. One of them is that it signals, again, this is not an isolated instance of abuse, but part of an actual coordinated plan. And it's also important in terms of gravity as one of the core international crimes that's of concern of the international community as a whole. It also comes with really concrete legal consequences. So it means that actually all states are required to investigate or cooperate with investigations to hold the individual perpetrators to account. And so what we see in this context we see not only Libyan perpetrators, but it's important to also shine a light on European, especially high-ranking EU and member state officials and their role in this. So how we analyze that is that there is a common plan between Libyan actors and European actors to prevent migration across the Mediterranean, to violently prevent migration across the Mediterranean. And European actors make essential contributions to this plan. I think that it's also important to say that we are not saying that that European actors created the system or the economy of migrant trafficking in Libya. That did pre-exist and predate the different European migration control agreements that we've seen, but especially since 2017, when the MOU was signed between Italy and Libya, we've seen European actors utilize this pre-existing system, but not only that, they've actually extended it and really transformed it. And that's what we really need to keep an eye on and focus on, and why it's so important that we call for legal accountability as well.
And I'd like to continue exactly with that then straight away, because I mentioned that you lead ECCHR work on Libya, so maybe you could explain to us like what legal mechanisms and tools actually exist to try to hold both Libyan and European actors accountable.
So we don't do this alone, I want to say first of all, but ECCHR has worked over the last several years with partner organizations like Lawyers for Justice in Libya, who made this film, and also with survivor-led groups like Refugees in Libya to seek legal accountability. And we have specifically filed two, they're called Article 15 communications to the International Criminal Court, asking for the prosecutor to investigate and prosecute crimes against humanity committed against migrants and refugees in Libya and at sea. And crucially, we ask them to focus not only on Libyan perpetrators, but on European officials. The legal argument that we make is, as I just kind of said, but I'll repeat a bit in a bit more detail, is a common plan theory of legal accountability. So we argue that European actors and Libyan actors pursue a common plan to prevent migration across the Mediterranean by both preventing through detention of people on land and by intercepting and forcibly returning people to contain them in Libya in detention as well. European actors make essential contributions to this common plan. And those essential contributions are not only the political agreements like the Italian Libya MOU, but it's also things like funding, training, political legitimacy and recognition, and also at times with interceptions, even direct coordination and operational cooperation and support, such as sharing coordinates of boats in distress. And it's under international criminal law, it's not actually necessary that all actors directly commit the crimes. This is what's very important about this argument, is that under the Rome Statute, it's also possible to be criminally responsible if you participate in a common plan and if you help make that plan possible, in full knowledge of the consequences. And in this instance, we know that the European actors are making these migration policies in full knowledge of the violent consequences. They know that when interceptions at sea happen, people will be sent back to Libya into this violent system of detention where they will be exploited, abused, and enter back into this cycle of violence. So we've taken this international criminal law approach for also some specific reasons. Like, you may also be wondering why we don't take a human rights law approach if we're so interested in structures and systems of violence, because international human rights law deals with state responsibility, whereas international criminal law deals with individual responsibility. But in this instance, human rights law frameworks have some specific limitations in the Libyan context. And mainly this is that under international human rights law, you usually have to prove that states have effective control either over territory or actors. And in the Libyan context, actually what we have is European actors exactly trying to evade or pretend that they don't have control. So they're deliberately trying to outsource control in order to attempt to evade legal responsibility. So there have been many human rights law challenges that have been made, but to date, those have not been successful. I should also say that our international criminal law approaches have also had mixed results. So in terms of at the International Criminal Court, we have so far yet been able to get them to directly investigate the role of European actors. We're going to continue to push for this. We won't stop because we think that it's incredibly crucial that there is this focus on European actors, because without them, this system would not exist in the way that it does today. But I think it's important to, I think it's also really important to note that there have been some, I would say, successes, but again, it's a mixed record. So at the International Criminal Court this year, you may have seen that there have been actually 2 arrests made of Libyan perpetrators, specifically high-ranking commanders at the Medico prison in Tripoli. And this is a prison in which both Libyan citizens and migrants have been detained and suffered horrendous abuses from 2015 to the present. One of these Libyan perpetrators was arrested in Germany several months ago and is imminently awaiting transfer to the International Criminal Court, and that will actually be the very first case, case taken at the International Criminal Court since its investigation into Libya opened in 2011. There are a few areas of concern that we have there, especially in terms of how the crimes against migrants will be treated. So far, how the prosecutor has framed the crimes leaves some ambiguity, and the pretrial chamber, which approved the arrest warrant, actually dropped out from victim status some of the migrants and refugees from particular crimes, particularly enslavement and sexual slavery. So this is a particular concern, and this is going to be something that we need to continue to watch and push for to make sure that crimes against migrants are also recognized duly within this stream of investigation as well. But otherwise, at the International Criminal Court, this case, case that will happen hopefully, is taking place within a stream of investigation of crimes in detention centers. There's also a separate stream for crimes against migrants. So far that has been much more disappointing in the sense that the ICC has seemingly decided not to take cases themselves within this stream, but to funnel their cooperation to domestic prosecutors in other European jurisdictions like the Netherlands, where next month we have a case against an Eritrean trafficker that will come up. And this is particularly disappointing because those domestic cases do not look at international crimes. They usually rely on crimes like trafficking or extortion, and while those are very important, it doesn't capture the full picture, and therefore it also leaves out a lot of the victims and the larger picture, the systemic picture of what's going on so it doesn't touch on responsibility of other actors, high-ranking actors like Europeans. And one maybe very last point is that so while the Libyan perpetrator who was arrested in Germany will, to everything that we know, be transferred to the court, earlier in the year there was another Libyan perpetrator who was arrested in Italy, but then returned to Libya by Italian authorities rather than surrendered and transferred to the court. So that's really important example to mention in terms of European states, and particularly Italy, which is the focus of our conversation tonight, not cooperating with international justice mechanisms. And for us, this is another huge red flag that they should actually be under investigation themselves. And maybe just one final word, I want to really make clear that legal accountability is only one of the tools that we have to end impunity, to point out responsibility and to expose the violence of all of the systems. And I think it is a powerful tool, but it's not the only one. But one of its powers is that it can help expose exactly what European authorities are trying to obfuscate. But we need to. It does show us that behind every migration control policy, there are decisions and decision makers, and those decision makers can and must also be held to account.
Thank you, Allison, for a summary of a super complex, big topic, and I'm sure there might be also more questions afterwards in the Q&A round. You look like you want to comment on that? Yes.
I wanted to comment on, I think, a very necessary point, because also in the documentary, and many more documentary, and the narrative that is being sold here is that everyone in Libya wants to come to Europe. For example, when we looked at Ben Walid, it's a transit center to Europe. That is literally not the case, because as I speak, there is nearly 1 million people from different countries of Africa who have run away from their homes because of the war, for example, Sudan, and they do not have any intention to arrive to Europe by crossing the Mediterranean. And I am also one example of that. What is happening here, maybe I'm going to give not a fitting scenario, where you go to a football stadium just to, as a football fan, to watch, and then they drag you to say, now you are one of the players. This is what is happening with the Diab family, for example, when they have this human trafficking facility. Immediately you arrive at the border in Sabha or in Kufra, there is those militias waiting to put you into their trucks and drive you to Bani Walid, put you under torture, extort money from you, and then promise you there is Europe. But this is the propaganda that Europe is using to say that people want to come. We have invasion, we have to prevent it, which is not true. If we look even at the data of people who have attempted to cross the Mediterranean this year, it's not even up to 1% of the people who live in Libya. Libya as a country is in need of people to work in Libya, but also people who are finding shelter in that particular country. This leads us all the way to North Africa. Before 2023, people like me, refugees, migrants, whoever, they were able to find shelter in Tunisia. But the moment Europe went there and gave millions of euros to the dictatorial regime of Kais Saied, chaos began, people got murdered, people got killed, many got dumped in the desert, and then there is violent interceptions in the central Mediterranean, which brings people into the repeated circle of violence. So I think this distinction is really fundamental for those of us who are here to try to always understand that there is a mass propaganda which is intentionally put in place to commit murder, to commit crimes against humanity on the rights of refugees and migrants.
Thank you. That's a very important addition to that. You can keep the microphone, because I think before we start with the questions, I would ask you and Phoebe then to close the discussion after adding what Allison said, that the legal avenue is a very important one, but it's not the only one, and it's very important that we also struggle on and fight on other levels. So I would like to, you are fighting on many different levels. So much that also Italy even spied on you because they consider you apparently too big enemy for the policies. But yeah, I mean, you're doing campaign right now, like maybe both of you would be great to elaborate a bit on what other strategies are you pursuing, and also how like the spatial investigations like you are doing, how they can play a part and actually challenge these policies.
Yeah, I think this is the field where I and my team excel, because for a number of years we have been forced to not trust the legal system because it's not put in our language, it's not articulating on the proper suffering and how it could be addressed. That being said, when I co-founded Refugees in Libya, it was not in Europe. I did not sit in this fancy office and just try, let's brainstorm and create a network that is big for the people. It meant that I was personally subjected to that suffering. And as a result, we wanted to start denouncing inside Libya to even bring awareness to the Libyan common people, because the same propaganda which Europe is selling here, it is the same that the human trafficker, that the people in the government are selling to say we have invasion which is coming. And then we tried with our physical procedure, which lasted for 3 months in the streets of Tripoli, under bullets, under extreme pressure from the Libyan militias. We managed to demonstrate that we are a people and we know what is happening, and we have a mechanism to start denouncing it and to call for accountability if there is any possibility. So when I was on the run from the Libyan militia and the government, I managed to cross the Mediterranean. We have seen here some arrived after 4 trial, some after 9. I did 5, the 6th time I arrived. It's a very vivid experience. When I arrived, we continued to create different mechanisms and to explore possible avenues that could lead to true accountability, which also led me to being a fellow with ECCHR for a whole 1 year, trying to understand the mechanism, how it works, and how we, as survivors, as people with lived experience, could also design our own language of accountability. That was one part of it. What we have extensively done over the years is to engage in public campaign, in debunking all this lie, what the memorandum is, what is happening in Libya. Yes, it's a failed state. Yes, there are militias, but we know without a weapon, without a bullet, which Libya doesn't seem to manufacture, that my leg wouldn't be shot, a colleague wouldn't die on the street or be captured in the central Mediterranean with the fast boat. So when we look at this, we have done different campaigns at EU level. We have gone to Geneva, of course. We have cooperated and contributed with our testimonies to the work of the international criminal justice system, for example, the ICC. And at a different level, we also look at Frontex, for example, which is a key player on the central Mediterranean. We have taken different initiatives that exist within the EU criminal justice system. For example, at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, and then within individual states. Here in Germany, in Italy, there are already a number of cases that has been initiated within the framework of denouncing the criminal initiative, which is called the memorandum between Italy and Libya, which then is fully supported by EU member states. So here we not only engage in giving our testimonies and sharing the resources, we document what is happening in Libya, what journalists cannot do. We have formed our own underground network that collect unfiltered testimonies and videos of torture of different kind, and then we publish it as it is. As a result, our Facebook account has been suspended, and we are struggling to get it back because they don't want this truth. Italy is constantly reporting, no, they need to take down this because we seem to be dangerous when we tell the truth, particularly when we cannot be manipulated because we suffered it, we lived it, and for a person like me, I will continue to live it because I mirror myself in the people who are still in Libya. This does not change. I mirror myself in those who are still in those removal centers across Italy, who even after making it, they are put on trial. When you talk about decriminalize, we have many young Sudanese kids who are now rotting in the cells of Greece because they are. It's horrible. You can see 14, 13-year-old children who are accused of stealing boats that attempted to escape the horrors of Libya, and then they will end up in 10 years jail, 15 years jail, without any possibility for future. So here, what we have done, at least this year, is to initiate a number of campaigns. Within that is also what is known as the Book of Shame, if you ever heard of it. It's a campaign that we started in 2022, and then since nothing changed, we decided to write a book. This book explores and gives extensive details to the testimonies of people who are still in Libya, those in Tunisia, those in Niger, where EU migratory policies have extended beyond control. So here, we not only focus on UNHCR and the humanitarian need of the people, but it's also up to the people, the recipient, who will be reading this book to question, why has a woman been raped? Why has a woman been left unsheltered in the streets of Tripoli? So something is happening. Within these legitimate questions, you will find that there is the hands of the EU. And of course, we try to focus on the memorandum. In the coming days, we will be in Rome for a 5-day initiative. I hope it will be a massive campaign to campaign against the memorandum. And we want support. This support comes from different persons that are in this room, researchers who understand the language of the EU, because this agreement, they are written in such a language that you cannot understand. It is written intentionally to not make us read. I cannot read 1,000 pages, which is designed basically to kill and to torture people. So here, with this campaign that we are initiating, we hope that the common European citizen can be well informed and understand what is happening. And then when it comes to electoral campaigns, which seems to be on the backs of black people like me, on refugees, on migrants, you will see that even politicians here in Germany, they are campaigning. The first on the agenda is migration. In Italy, when I had just arrived in 2022, Meloni, she was all about migration. I'm going to stop the invasion. I'm going to do this. The Italians even can't afford to go to the hospital. How is that possible? They are talking about tomato not being produced. Why don't you talk about this instead of saying you wage war against migration? But we are also at a very difficult period where we look at the UN General Assembly. We have people who are being idealized. We have Trump waging war on vulnerable people whose primary suffering is thanks to the Western policies of producing weapons, of making mass industry of wars around Africa that cannot allow us to live in our place with concrete stability. I think that's it.
That's a lot. Yeah, thank you. And I think also for everyone, that you also have a website where you can also look about also the current campaign, as far as I know. But I think it also, what you also just mentioned, also connects maybe especially the fact that all these agreements, they're written in a language that's so difficult to understand, and actually to realize what's going on. And maybe we can close with a final remark about you, Phoebe, also, like why then, especially an investigation like this, and I think we can clearly see it also tonight, plays also an important role in challenging these policies.
Yeah, so this investigation is being used to support a legal case right now for one of the high-profile traffickers that was working in Bani Walid. And I think it's worth saying that there are legal cases, as you mentioned, for high-profile traffickers that are Libyan, but not legal avenues at the moment for Europeans that are involved, you know, like for high-level people in Frontex or other kind of border organizations in Europe. And so this investigation was both about expanding the legal kind of accountability in Bani Walid, but also showing that the Europeans are accountable as well for this. And I think Bani Walid is a good example, because Currently at the ICC, there are conversations about traffickers, there's conversations about Bani Walid, and in a way, they're kind of using Bani Walid as a way to say that, you know, case closed, we're kind of going after these traffickers, we're closing down sites like Bani Walid. And they're using it as a scapegoat, really, and they're using it as an avoidance technique to avoid their responsibility as well for the continuation and expansion of the industry. And so what was important for our investigation was to show that the logics of Bani Walid actually extended into the state-sponsored sites. So Almaya and Anzara both continue the logics that were set up in Bani Walid, and these are the sites that are actually getting financial support from Europe. And as you were saying earlier, you can really see this kind of colonial violence taking place, right? So Europe is enacting several layers of violence. They're both kind of creating the conditions that are leading countries like Libya to be able to need to use migration as a way to profit through trafficking and smuggling networks, whilst at the same time then going after Libyan officials and they're saying, you are the ones that are causing this problem, we have nothing to do with it. So you can see these kind of layers of violence that are enacted by Europe, and so it's not just enough at the moment to be going for legal accountability because the legal avenues really aren't there to be going after Frontex, be going after other kind of European officials. So we need to then be putting political pressure. And that's what the campaign is about, that's what this film is about. It's about pushing culturally, politically, an awareness about what's happening to be able to try and create new avenues for legal responsibility as well.
Great, amazing. And I think it's also really great to see, and this is also an example how different actors and tools and different angles work together collectively. I think you're a very great example of that. I think we're already tight on time, but I think we still have like about 15 minutes. So if there are any questions, it would be the moment now to ask them. And maybe we can, depending on how many collect first, like 2 or 3, I don't know. Are there any questions? Okay, there's one. And yeah, we start with you. Yeah, maybe that would be good. So do you have to answer?
Thanks a lot for the movie and the kind of really interesting for all of us to get to know all of this. I was actually wondering when Julia was telling, like, you basically told us that people from Libya are being accountable and one trafficker from Eritrea, I think. You mentioned also that case, and then I was wondering, like, okay, but how does this, how does the ICC then like hold Europe accountable? And yeah, I mean to also build on what like Phoebe said, that there is not such an avenue. Yeah, I didn't understand what it means that there's not such an avenue. Like, could you maybe elaborate that a little bit? Does it mean that Europe has like a power on ICC and this is the reason, or yeah?
Thanks for the question. I think the answer is a political answer. So just to make sure it's very clear, the ICC can, and I think should, be prosecuting high-ranking EU and member state officials. They're just not right now. So, I mean, the court, we should also acknowledge, is under attack at the moment in general and might not exist in so long. There are significant sanctions from the US so far against individual judges and members of the Office of the Prosecutor. So there's a lot of political attention, and there's a very visible, obvious politicization of justice as well. I don't think that that's the only reason, because prior to the arrest warrants that were issued against Israeli officials, which started the whole U.S. Sanction process. Prior to that, the ICC was not investigating European actors as well. There could be all sorts of reasons for this. Traditionally, European states have been very strong supporters, both financially and in terms of political recognition and support for international law and institutions like the ICC. But it's important to note that there's also been a bit of a double standard. So we have not so far seen, in the past few years, we have seen the first arrest warrants issued against Western actors, but we have so far not seen any kind of European or Western actor held to account at the International Criminal Court. So that's like an important thing to say, but there's not one clear answer for why they haven't done it. That means that there is, as Phoebe just mentioned, a role for political mobilization, for other tools to try to pressure institutions, like legal institutions that could take these actions, to actually do them, because none of these things are happening in a vacuum. They're all interlinked. So I hope that I answered your question, and I wonder, yeah, thank you. You both might have things to add.
Very quickly. I also think it's worth saying that there was also a change, I think, when we were doing this investigation. So it started like over a year ago, I guess, and then we published it earlier this year. And there were these conversations about putting pressure on the ICC to be able to have a European held accountable for what's happening. And it seemed like this kind of pipe dream, but of course it's worth saying that we don't idolize the ICC at all. We don't think it's this amazing space for accountability and this perfect form of justice. Like, we see it as a deeply, deeply compromised space. But during the year of the investigation, I think there were even more compromises in that international law, the ICC, legal avenues towards migration were also coming under attack. And I mean, now in Europe, and also the US and other places, the very kind of slim laws we already have protecting people on the move, protecting refugees and migrants, are coming under attack further, you know? And so the small crumbs that are there are being taken away. And so I think also with the investigation, it wasn't just to be looking towards the kind of legal route, but also to show that even for the most cynical person, even for a person that completely believes that all people on the move should be stopped from entering Europe, believes in, you know, these right-wing populist rhetoric, they can even see that it doesn't make any sense to be funding detention systems and detention networks in Libya, because in fact they're putting money in the pockets of smugglers and traffickers. So there was a kind of shift, and I think that shift is also reflective of like a changing in what's happening in this context at the moment, of the kind of legal routes becoming even smaller, and having to really be thinking about the mindset of this kind of crazy political moment, particularly towards people on the move.
Yeah, I always have a very different perspective on these type of things. I think I already attempted to articulate on this point, because first of all, when you look at the practicability of the agreement in itself, it does not tie immediate responsibility to Europe. Europe have managed to write a number of documents in which it articulates, for example, the MOU, what does it go for? When we heard in the documentary that there are in Libya at least 29 detention facilities belonging to the DSIM, which is a recipient of the EU funding, the framework around this is that it is to maintain detention facility which will provide medication for the people and for their well-being, to provide enough sleeping places, and then when there is human rights violation, when there is crime, when there is rape, when there is torture, when there is extortion of money within the process, because 2,000 people have been crammed in a facility that could take 100, Europe says, no, we are not the one. We are not paying for these kind of things. We are paying for this and that. And then the ICC doesn't have the gut to really look at what has been implemented, rather than looking at what has been written in these empty papers, which says it is with all the due respect to human rights and so on and so forth. It is the same thing that has been implemented in Tunisia in 2023. When you look at it, how many thousands of people have died since the last 2 years? Several thousands of people. But the EU, the EU Commission, when it sends an inquiry to investigate what is happening, they say, yes, we acknowledge some violation may have been committed, but this is not what we are paying for. Now we are trying to revise the framework in which we are engaging with this entity. It goes like this, and it finds a way to escape from responsibility. It is the same, I keep adding, that happened in Niger. In 2015, the EU managed to enforce a law, a bill that was even criminalizing the citizens of Niger from moving from one territory to another within that particular country. They call it the Law 36. So within this alone, how even the international criminal justice system cannot start and open an independent investigation into such kind of crimes, because it's crimes against humanity. A lot of people have had to suffer. I lived in Niger within those periods. We couldn't move from one place without being tortured by Nigerian police who were literally abiding and taking order from Europe as a result of the framework which was written under the border migration control. That is one point how I view it. And again, coming to the political will from Europe, we know that there is no literally system that wants to hold Europe and European politicians accountable for the crimes that they are committing of various kinds in Africa, against the African people, on the African soil, in stealing the resources. This is not going to be there. That is why we are engaging in the campaigns. That's why we are developing different ideas, like the People's Permanent Tribunal. This naming and shaming, of course, it does not stop there if we don't have symbolically prosecuted politicians like von der Leyen having to go to 20 years in prison because she was overseeing an agreement that was signed and built and enabling the resources to be sent to Libya, to an entity that had no even formal bank account through which they could trace the money, who received, how did it go. If we don't look at this critically, I don't think we are seeing any possible avenues for accountability. That being said, I had a task which I was mandated to do. We are collecting statements, 1 minute statement for the MOU campaign for Rome. Sigrom from ECCHR, she's sitting there. I think if anyone is willing to contribute something, why you believe the MOU should be stopped, we will be very grateful to have it as a support. Thank you.